Looking back, I think the real problem started during the pandemic lockdown. Not that I was unhappy before that. Daniel and I had built something solid together over the years. We met in our late 20s when we were both climbing our respective career ladders. Him in graphic design and me in marketing. Those early years were actually pretty great. We dated for 2 years, lived together for another year to make sure we were compatible, and then had this beautiful wedding that everyone still talks about. But 2020 changed everything. Suddenly we're both stuck at home, and while Daniel seemed perfectly content to hole up in his little home office working on his design projects, I felt like I was suffocating. He'd emerge for meals looking all satisfied and creative, talking about color palettes and typography, like they were the most fascinating things in the world, while I'm going stir-crazy trying to do marketing calls from our bedroom. Don't get me wrong, I love that he's passionate about his work. But there's a whole world out there, and he was acting like our condo was some kind of artistic retreat. I started noticing things about our relationship that I'd never really paid attention to before. Like how Daniel was perfectly happy spending entire weekends at home, maybe ordering takeout and watching documentaries about obscure artists I'd never heard of. When I'd suggest going out somewhere, even just for a walk around the neighborhood, he'd give me this look like I was asking him to climb Mount Everest. "We have everything we need right here," he'd say, gesturing around our living room like it was paradise. But I didn't have everything I needed. I needed conversation with other people. I needed to feel like I existed outside of our little domestic bubble. The worst part was how invisible I felt. I'd put on a nice dress for dinner, do my hair, maybe try a new recipe, and Daniel would barely look up from whatever design portfolio he was scrolling through on his tablet. "This looks great." "Thanks," he'd mumble, but his eyes never left the screen. I started wondering when I'd become just part of the furniture to him. When had I stopped being someone worth paying attention to? When the world finally started opening up again, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Daniel, predictably, was less enthusiastic about returning to normal social interaction. "I kind of like our quiet routine," he said when I suggested we start going out to restaurants again. "It's peaceful." Peaceful for him. Maybe for me, it felt like slow death by boredom. I started making more of an effort with my appearance when I went back to the office. Nothing crazy. Just taking time with my makeup again. Wearing clothes that actually fit well instead of the pandemic sweatpants uniform. It felt amazing when my coworkers complimented my hair or noticed when I wore something new. These were normal human interactions that I'd been starving for. But when I'd come home excited about my day, Daniel would just nod absently while sketching in his notebook. The attention from other people was intoxicating after feeling invisible for so long. Male colleagues would hold doors a little longer, make eye contact when they talked to me, actually seem interested in what I had to say. It wasn't anything inappropriate, just basic human acknowledgement that I was an attractive, interesting woman, something I'd almost forgotten about myself. That's when I started taking longer lunch breaks, going to that coffee shop on 5th Street where there was always interesting conversation happening. I told myself it was harmless, just getting out of the office, being around people who had energy and enthusiasm for life. Daniel certainly wasn't providing that at home, and it was at that coffee shop where I met Marcus. He was there with some colleagues, and when our eyes met across the room, he actually smiled. Not the polite, distracted smile I'd gotten used to from Daniel, but a real smile that said he noticed me and liked what he saw. When he came over to introduce himself, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. That flutter of excitement when someone attractive shows genuine interest in you. Marcus was everything Daniel wasn't. Confident, outgoing, the type of guy who commanded attention when he walked into a room. He was a few years older than me, with this easy charm that made conversation feel effortless. We talked for almost an hour about everything from work to travel to books we'd read recently. He actually listened to my answers and asked follow-up questions, like my thoughts mattered to him. "I have to be honest with you," he said as we were finishing our coffee. "I noticed you the moment you walked in here, and I've been trying to work up the courage to come talk to you for the past 20 minutes. The directness was refreshing after years of Daniel's assumption that I'd always just be there, requiring no effort or attention. When I mentioned I was married, Marcus didn't back away like most men would. Instead, he leaned forward slightly and said, "I don't care if you're married. I want you." The boldness of it should have shocked me. But instead it sent this thrill through me that I hadn't felt in forever. Here was someone willing to take risks for me, someone who found me worth pursuing despite complications. I knew I should have left right then. Should have politely declined and gone back to my office and pretended the conversation never happened. But when Marcus suggested we continue our talk somewhere more private, somewhere we could really get to know each other, I heard myself saying yes before my rational mind could intervene. He had access to a colleague's apartment nearby. He explained. Someone who traveled frequently for work and let friends use the place when needed. It was innocent enough, just a quiet place to talk without the coffee shop crowd around us. At least that's what I told myself as we walked the 3 blocks to the building. The moment we got inside that apartment, something shifted. Maybe it was being in a private space together, or maybe it was the way Marcus looked at me like I was the most desirable woman he'd ever seen. But suddenly I felt alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. When he kissed me, it was like waking up from a long sleep. This was what passion felt like. This was what it meant to be wanted. I know how this sounds. I know what people think when they hear about a married woman who ends up in bed with someone she just met. But in that moment, I genuinely forgot I was married. It sounds impossible, but it's true. Daniel and our quiet little life felt like something that happened to someone else. In another lifetime, all that existed was this incredible feeling of being desired and appreciated and alive. Marcus made me feel beautiful in a way I'd almost forgotten I could feel. He paid attention to every detail, complimented things about me that Daniel hadn't noticed in years. "You're incredible," he whispered. And I believed him because his actions backed up his words. This was what I'd been missing, what I'd been slowly dying without. That afternoon became the first of many. Marcus would text me during the day, and I'd find myself checking my phone constantly, feeling that rush of excitement every time his name appeared on my screen. We'd meet at the apartment 2 or 3 times a week, and those hours became the highlight of my entire existence. For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to. The strange part was how easy it became to live 2 completely different lives. At home with Daniel, I was the same quiet wife I'd always been, going through the motions of our domestic routine. But during those stolen hours with Marcus, I was vibrant and passionate and fully myself. It was like I'd discovered this whole other version of me that had been buried under years of boring marriage. Daniel started noticing changes. Of course, I was putting more effort into my appearance, buying new clothes, spending more time on my hair and makeup. I was also more distant emotionally. How could I not be when I was getting all my real connection and intimacy elsewhere? But instead of asking himself why his wife might be seeking fulfillment outside their marriage, Daniel decided to become suspicious and paranoid. "You seem different lately," he said one evening as I was getting dressed to go out with friends. At least, that's what I'd told him. Really, I was meeting Marcus for dinner at a restaurant across town where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. "Different how?" I asked, though I was barely paying attention. I was trying to decide between 2 dresses and wondering which one Marcus would prefer. I don't know. More secretive, I guess. You're always checking your phone, and you've been going out a lot more than usual. Daniel's voice had this edge to it that I'd never heard before. "I'm not being secretive," I said, which was technically true. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was just living my life and enjoying the fact that someone found me interesting enough to want to spend time with me. Maybe I'm just tired of sitting at home every single night watching you work on your projects. That should have been his cue to suggest we do something together. Maybe plan a date night or a weekend trip. Instead, Daniel just frowned and went back to his sketching. Typical. He could point out what he didn't like about my behavior, but he couldn't be bothered to actually address the underlying issues in our marriage. The questions kept coming, though Daniel started paying attention to things he'd ignored for years. When I left the house, when I came back, who I said I was with, "You're being paranoid," I told him when he asked too many questions about a supposed girls' night out. "Since when do you need a detailed itinerary of my social life?" But Daniel wasn't backing down like he usually did when I got defensive. "I'm not paranoid, Hannah. I'm observant. You're different. And something's going on." The certainty in his voice was unsettling. But I convinced myself he was just being controlling because he'd gotten too comfortable having me all to himself during the pandemic. Marcus, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly important to me. Our relationship had evolved beyond just physical attraction. We talked about everything, shared our dreams and frustrations, supported each other through work stress. He understood me in ways Daniel never had, appreciated parts of my personality that my husband had never even noticed. With Marcus, I felt like the best version of myself. "You know, this can't last forever," Marcus said one afternoon as we lay in bed at the apartment. "Eventually something's gonna have to give," but I didn't want to think about that. I was happier than I'd been in years, finally getting the attention and passion I deserved. Why should I have to give that up to go back to being invisible in my own marriage? Daniel had had years to notice me, to make me feel wanted and appreciated. It wasn't my fault that he'd taken me for granted until someone else showed interest. The confrontation came on a Tuesday night in October. I'd gotten careless with my phone. I was leaving it on the kitchen counter while I took a shower. Daniel must have seen Marcus's text message come through, because when I woke up at 2 a.m, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, with this look on his face I'd never seen before. "Who is he?" Daniel's voice was calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been yelling. "The guy you've been texting, the guy you've been sneaking off to see." My heart was pounding, but I tried to maintain some dignity. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Give me my phone back." "Marcus," Daniel continued, like I hadn't spoken. "The guy who's been telling you how beautiful you are and how much he misses you. The guy you've been lying to me about for months." There was no point in denying it anymore. Daniel had clearly read enough to know the truth. "It's not what you think," I started, but he held up his hand to stop me. "Actually, it's exactly what I think. You're having an affair." Daniel set my phone down on the nightstand and looked at me with this expression of complete detachment. "How long?" "Daniel, please, let me explain. You don't understand what's been happening between us. We've been growing apart. And I just needed—" "How long?" "Hannah. A few months," I admitted, "but it's not about not loving you. It's about feeling alive again. Feeling like someone actually sees me and wants to be with me." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe he was processing what I'd said. Maybe understanding that this was as much about our marriage problems as it was about Marcus. But when he finally spoke, his voice was steady and final. "Okay, we're done." "What do you mean we're done?" I sat up, suddenly panicked by how calm he sounded. "Daniel, we can work through this. Couples survive infidelity all the time. We can go to counseling, figure out what went wrong, fix this." But Daniel was already getting up from the bed. "No, Hannah, we're done. I'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight, and I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow." "You're not even gonna try." I couldn't believe how quickly he was giving up on us. "You're just gonna throw away our entire marriage because I made one mistake." This wasn't one mistake. This was months of lying. Months of choosing someone else over our marriage. Months of making me feel crazy for noticing that my own wife was pulling away from me. Daniel paused in the doorway. "And you're still calling it a mistake instead of taking responsibility for what you chose to do." Over the following days, I tried everything to get Daniel to reconsider. I ended things with Marcus immediately, deleted his number, promised never to see him again. I researched marriage counselors, found articles about couples who'd survived infidelity, even looked into legal options for requiring counseling before divorce proceedings could begin. But Daniel was like a different person. The quiet, accommodating husband I'd known for over a decade had been replaced by someone with absolute clarity about what he would and wouldn't accept. He moved through the separation process with this methodical efficiency that was honestly frightening. Within a week, he'd consulted with a lawyer, opened his own bank account, and started looking for a new place to live. "This is insane," I told him as he packed his design equipment into boxes. "You're destroying our marriage over something that doesn't even have to affect us." Marcus meant nothing to me compared to what we have together. Daniel corrected without looking up from his packing. "What we had together, and it meant enough for you to risk everything we built for it." I tried to get my own lawyer to fight the divorce, to require mediation or counseling, anything that might slow down Daniel's rush to end our marriage. But apparently you can't force someone to stay married to you, even when they're being completely unreasonable about working through problems. The judge was particularly unsympathetic when I explained that my husband was refusing to try counseling. "Mrs. Chen," he said, looking at me over his glasses, "your husband is not required to attend counseling if he doesn't want to save the marriage. Divorce is not a punishment. It's a legal dissolution of a contract that one or both parties no longer wish to honor." Meanwhile, Marcus had completely disappeared from my life. When I called to tell him that Daniel had found out and I needed his support to get through this difficult time, he was surprisingly cold. "Hannah, you knew the risks when we started this." He said, "I never promised you anything beyond what we had. And I certainly never said I'd be there to help you deal with the fallout from your marriage. But I thought we had something real." I said, feeling desperate and abandoned. "I thought you cared about me." "I did care about you. I still do. But I have my own life to protect. And I can't have you calling me in the middle of your divorce drama. It's better if we don't contact each other anymore." The line went dead. And when I tried calling back, it went straight to voicemail. Just like that, the man I'd risked everything for had dismissed me like I was some inconvenient complication in his life. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Daniel never spoke to me again after that night. He found the text messages. All communication went through our lawyers. And even then, he was generous with the settlement. I got half of everything, which should have been enough to start over comfortably. But the financial reality of single life was harsher than I'd expected. The condo sold quickly, but after lawyer fees and splitting the proceeds with Daniel, I could only afford a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. My single income didn't stretch nearly as far as our combined finances had, and I found myself struggling to maintain the lifestyle I'd gotten accustomed to during our marriage. The emotional toll was even worse. I'd lost my husband, my affair partner, and most of our mutual friends in one devastating sweep. People seemed to think I was some kind of monster who'd destroyed a perfectly good marriage for no reason, when really I'd just been trying to feel valued and alive again. 3 months after the divorce was final, I started having health problems. What I thought was a minor infection turned out to be something more serious that required expensive treatment and multiple doctor visits. When I tried to contact Marcus to let him know he should get tested, he was furious. "You knew the risks," he said again, like it was his catchphrase for avoiding responsibility. "Don't contact me again, Hannah." That's when I found out from a mutual acquaintance that Marcus had been seeing multiple women during our affair. I wasn't his only secret relationship. I was just one of several married women he was involved with. The realization that I'd destroyed my marriage for someone who saw me as completely replaceable was devastating. In a moment of anger and hurt, I looked up his wife's information and called her. I thought she deserved to know what kind of man she was married to. And honestly, I wanted Marcus to face some consequences for his actions. But his wife already knew. "Honey," she said in this tired voice, "Marcus has been cheating on me for years. I stay because of the children, and because I've built a life here that I'm not willing to give up for his mistakes. But thank you for calling." She hung up, and I realized that even my attempt at revenge had been meaningless. Everyone involved in this situation had moved on except me. 2 years later, I'm sitting in this small apartment that smells like the upstairs neighbor's cooking, looking at credit card bills I can barely afford, and medical bills from the STD treatment that cost me thousands of dollars. My blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says it's stress-related, which is pretty rich considering I'm only 34 years old. I grind my teeth so badly at night that I had to get a mouth guard, and my hair has been thinning from the constant anxiety. I tried calling Daniel's old number a few months ago, thinking maybe enough time had passed that we could at least be civil to each other. But the number was disconnected. He'd changed it, erasing me from his life so completely that I have no way to reach him even if I wanted to. My friends from our married days have mostly moved on. They stayed neutral during the divorce. But it's awkward being the single person in a group of couples, especially when everyone knows why you're single. The few attempts I've made at dating have been disasters. Apparently, 34-year-old divorced women carry a lot more baggage than I realized. Some nights I pour myself a glass of wine and think about how different things might have been if Daniel had just paid more attention to me during those pandemic months, if he'd noticed that I was struggling, if he'd made an effort to connect with me emotionally, if he'd shown some interest in keeping our marriage exciting and passionate. But he was content with our boring routine. And I was the one who had to pay the price for wanting something more. I know people think I'm selfish for wanting to feel desired and appreciated, but I was a good wife for over 10 years. I supported Daniel's career, managed our household, tried to be the partner he needed. Is it really so terrible that I wanted someone to make me feel special and beautiful and worth pursuing? Is it my fault that my own husband had stopped seeing me as anything more than a roommate? The electricity company sent a shut-off notice last week because I'm behind on payments. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who struggles to keep the lights on, but here we are. My parents can't help. They're barely managing on their retirement income. I've maxed out my credit cards trying to maintain some semblance of the life I used to have. Meanwhile, Daniel has probably moved on completely. For all I know, he's found someone new. Someone who appreciates his quiet, artistic soul and doesn't need the kind of passion and excitement that I craved. Maybe they spend their evenings looking at design portfolios together and think that's the height of romance. Maybe she's perfectly content being invisible as long as she gets to be invisible with him. The irony is that I understand now what Daniel meant about the lying being worse than the affair itself. Not because I've gained some great insight into marriage and fidelity, but because I see how Marcus lied to me just as easily as I lied to Daniel. The difference is that Daniel was honest about his boundaries and what he would accept, while I convinced myself that I deserved to have everything, a stable marriage and an exciting affair. But I still don't think Daniel was completely innocent in all this. Yes, I made choices that hurt him, but those choices came from real needs that weren't being met in our marriage. A more mature, emotionally intelligent husband would have recognized the signs that his wife was unhappy and worked to address the underlying problems instead of just noticing the symptoms and getting suspicious. I'm not saying the affair was his fault, but marriages don't fall apart in a vacuum. There were two people in that relationship, and only one of us was trying to inject some passion and excitement into our lives. The other one was perfectly content to let things stagnate until his wife felt so invisible that she sought validation elsewhere. Now I'm the one dealing with all the consequences while Daniel gets to play the victim and move on with his life. I'm the one with the medical bills and the financial struggles and the social isolation. I'm the one who has to start over at 34, with nothing to show for 15 years of adult life, except a pile of debt and a reputation as the woman who threw away a good marriage. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. Not by staying faithful. I needed what Marcus gave me, needed to feel alive and desired again. But maybe if I'd been honest with Daniel from the beginning, told him I was unhappy and needed more passion in our marriage, we could have found a way to open up our relationship or take a break while we figured things out. But Daniel was never the type to be flexible about relationship boundaries. He was old-fashioned that way, believing in traditional marriage vows and exclusive commitment. There was no scenario where he would have been okay with me finding fulfillment elsewhere, even temporarily, even if it ultimately made our marriage stronger. So here I am, dealing with the fallout from wanting more than a boring, passionless marriage, learning the hard way that society doesn't have much sympathy for women who refuse to settle for being invisible in their own lives, paying the price for believing I deserve to feel beautiful and desired and appreciated, instead of just grateful for stability and financial security. The wine helps. Some nights, helps me forget about the stack of bills on my kitchen counter and the silence of this empty apartment and the way my phone never rings anymore unless it's a debt collector or a telemarketer. Helps me remember what it felt like to be the center of someone's attention, to be worth pursuing and fighting for and risking everything to be with. Those memories are about all I have left now. And most days, they don't feel like nearly enough.